Hello and welcome. Standing stones have marked the landscape of Toril for millennia, and among them are structures known as obelisks that have appeared throughout various dungeons and dragons' adventures. You may have encountered them in your travels through published campaigns, mysterious monoliths that pulse with ancient power and hint at forgotten purposes. They appear in locations ranging from the frozen ruins of Ithrin to the depths beneath Phandalin, each one raising questions about who built them and why. Tonight, you will explore what these enigmatic structures represent based on the scattered clues found throughout D&D lore, separating what is known from what remains mysterious. Your character walks through a forgotten valley, and there, rising from the earth like a finger pointing accusingly at the sky, stands an obelisk. The way these structures appear in various adventures suggests they are not mere decorations, but serve specific, often crucial purposes within their respective stories. In Phandelver and below, the shattered obelisk, fragments of such a structure become central to the plot, involving mind flayers and their dark designs. In Rime of the Frost Maiden, a similar artifact called a spindle contributed to the fall of the ancient Netherese city of Ithrin. These examples hint that obelisks may have been far more common in ages past, serving purposes that our current age has largely forgotten. The most concrete information about obelisk origins comes from recent D&D publications. According to established lore, an ancient and mysterious group known only as the Weavers created obelisks, designed to counteract the effects of calamitous spells and cataclysmic events. The Weavers themselves remain shrouded in mystery, and there is a disturbing reason for this lack of information. The evil wizard Vecna, in an act of supreme malevolence, stole one such obelisk and used it to erase the obelisk creators from existence entirely. This explains why so little is known about the Weavers. They were literally removed from reality, leaving only their creations behind as evidence they ever existed. Vecna did not stop at destruction. He also stole the knowledge needed to create new obelisks, knowledge that would eventually fall into other hands. That knowledge later came into the possession of Netherese wizards, who built similar obelisks of their own. The Netherese believed that if some catastrophe destroyed their civilization, these obelisks could potentially preserve or restore what was lost. Given that Netheril fell approximately 1,850 years before the current era, in a magical catastrophe known as Karsus's Folly, the irony of their foresight is not lost on historians. The Netherese connection to obelisks provides our most substantial understanding of these structures. Netheril was an empire of unparalleled magical achievement, a civilization where archmages wielded power that would humble most modern spellcasters. They discovered the Nether Scrolls, ancient artifacts containing magical knowledge so profound that it transformed them from skilled practitioners into masters who could make floating cities a reality. If any civilization after the weavers understood how to create and utilize obelisks, it was Netheril. The city of Ithrin, one of Netheril's flying enclaves, fell from the sky and became trapped in ice in the region now known as Icewind Dale. Within its frozen ruins lies a rune-carved stone spindle, an artifact dating back even before Netheril to an empire called Astoria. This spindle, when experiments were conducted upon it, caused the city's Mythalar to fail, resulting in Ithrin's catastrophic crash. The spindle possesses extraordinary properties if targeted by a spell of 5th level or higher. It triggers an explosion of magical energy that suppresses all magic items and effects within 3 miles for 24 hours. Whether this spindle is a type of obelisk or a related artifact remains unclear, but its existence suggests that multiple ancient civilizations created similar reality-altering structures. The fragments of the shattered obelisk beneath Phandalin tell another story. According to that adventure, pieces of an ancient obelisk became scattered, and various factions seek to collect them. Mind flayers, through their agents, and a cult devoted to the elder evil Ilvash, work to gather these fragments for purposes that threaten the region. The obelisk pieces apparently retain power even when broken, suggesting that these structures are not merely carved stone, but objects fundamentally infused with magical essence. What the assembled obelisk might accomplish remains a question best left to those adventuring in that region. Beyond these specific examples, obelisk lore becomes murky and speculative. The scattered nature of obelisk appearances across different adventures and time periods suggests they may have served various purposes throughout history, but concrete details remain elusive. Some appear to be markers or monuments, while others clearly possess active magical properties. The possibility exists that not all obelisks were created by the same hands or for the same purposes. The weavers created the first ones, Vecna stole their knowledge, and the Netherese built their own variations. This chain of transmission implies that obelisk construction techniques could have spread further, reaching other civilizations we know little about. You stand before an obelisk, examining it for clues to its origin. Without knowledge of its specific history, determining who built it and why proves nearly impossible. Is this a weaver original? One of the ancient structures meant to counteract magical catastrophes? Did Vecna create it during his possession of obelisk-making knowledge? Is it Nethere's work, built by archwizards attempting to safeguard their civilization? Or did the techniques spread even further, adopted by civilizations whose names have been lost to time? The runes might provide answers if you could read them, but even identifying the language system proves challenging. The relationship between obelisks and other forms of ancient magical architecture remains uncertain. The mythals created by elven high mages, those legendary fields that protected entire cities and altered natural laws within their boundaries, represent a different school of magical engineering. Whether obelisks and mythals share theoretical foundations or represent entirely separate approaches to large-scale enchantment is a question scholars continue to debate. Both require immense magical power and sophisticated understanding to create. Both serve protective or preservative functions, but the construction methods appear fundamentally different based on available evidence. The question of who can create an obelisk in the current age troubles many who understand what these structures represent. The weavers are gone, erased by Vecna's malice. Vecna himself has ascended beyond mortal limitations. The Netherese Empire fell thousands of years ago, its greatest secrets buried beneath sand or locked in ruins. Can modern magic replicate these achievements? The answer appears to be no, at least not in the full scope of what ancient obelisks accomplished. The knowledge has been lost, the techniques forgotten, the magical paradigm that made their creation possible no longer accessible to contemporary spellcasters. This loss extends beyond mere academic curiosity. If obelisks truly were designed to counteract calamitous spells and catastrophic events, their absence leaves the world more vulnerable than it was in ages past. The next time a wizard attempts something on the scale of Karsus's folly, there may be no obelisk network standing ready to mitigate the damage. The next planar breach or reality warping catastrophe might proceed unchecked because the safeguards installed by the weavers have been destroyed, corrupted, or simply forgotten. This realization lends urgency to the study of existing obelisks. They may be the only protection remaining from threats our ancestors feared enough to build continent-spanning defenses against. The distribution of known obelisks appears scattered and random, though this may reflect gaps in knowledge rather than actual placement patterns. Phandalin in the Sword Coast region has fragments beneath it. Ithrin in Icewind Dale contains the reality-altering spindle. References to obelisks appear in other adventures and sourcebooks, suggesting they are scattered across Faerun and perhaps beyond. Whether these represent a deliberate network or isolated individual structures remains unknown. The Netherese certainly would have had the ambition and capability to build multiple obelisks across their territory. But confirming such a network's existence requires more evidence than currently available. Some scholars theorize about obelisk purposes beyond the documented counterspell function. Could they serve as communication devices, allowing instant contact across vast distances? Might they function as dimensional anchors, stabilizing reality in regions prone to planar instability? Do they store knowledge like magical libraries, preserving information against the possibility of civilization's collapse? All these theories have some basis in what obelisks have been observed to do. Yet none can be confirmed without access to the weaver's original designs or comprehensive Netherese records. The academic study of obelisks faces significant challenges. Primary sources are nearly non-existent. The weavers were erased from reality, and Netherese records are fragmentary at best. Physical access to intact obelisks is limited and often dangerous, as many are located in ruins haunted by monsters or corrupted by dark magic. Experiments on obelisks risk catastrophic results, as Ithrin's fate demonstrates. Experimentation on their spindle artifact led directly to the city's destruction. These factors combine to ensure that obelisk knowledge advances slowly, each new discovery hard-won and incomplete. What can be stated with confidence is that obelisks represent a level of magical achievement that modern civilization has not matched. They are remnants of ages when magic was wielded with greater sophistication, when beings of immense power pursued goals that spanned centuries or millennia. Understanding them fully would require not just learning their construction methods, but comprehending the entire magical worldview of the weavers, a task made impossible by Vecna's erasure of those ancient architects from existence. Yet the attempt must be made, because somewhere among the scattered obelisks of Faerun may lie keys to understanding and perhaps averting the catastrophes that these structures were originally built to prevent. You stand before an obelisk as night falls, its surface potentially responding to celestial movements or magical currents in ways too subtle for untrained observation. The stone may hum with residual power, or it may stand silent, its functions dormant or depleted after millennia. For a moment, you consider what it represents: the ambitions of the weavers who sought to protect reality itself, the evil of Vecna who destroyed them, the desperate hope of Netherese archwizards who tried to preserve their civilization, and the possibility that their collective efforts might still serve purposes in the modern age. Then the moment passes, and you are left with more questions than answers, knowing only that you have glimpsed something profound and ancient, something that will draw you onward in your quest for understanding. Section 2. The Obelisks of Netheril and Arcane Mastery. The greatest magical empire known to history, the one that achieved wonders unmatched in the current age, was Netheril. When you speak of obelisks and their potential applications, the conversation inevitably turns to the Netherese, because they possessed knowledge stolen from the very beings who created these structures. These were the archmages who made floating cities routine, who bent reality to their will with such power that their achievements seem more like myth than history. And according to established lore, the Netherese built obelisks of their own, using knowledge that originated with Vecna's theft from the weavers. Your journey takes you deep into the Anarok Desert, following the historical record that tells you this wasteland was once the heartland of the Netherese Empire. The sun beats down mercilessly, and the sand stretches endlessly in all directions. But you press forward because you know what this region represents. This desert, now desolate and lifeless, was once fertile land where the greatest magical civilization in human history flourished for over 3,000 years. Somewhere beneath these sands lie the remains of that glory, and possibly intact Netherese obelisks built according to the stolen knowledge of the weavers. The Netherese Empire rose to prominence approximately 3,400 years before Dale Reckoning, though some sources place critical developments even earlier. They were humans predominantly, though their society grew more complex over millennia. What transformed them from skilled spellcasters into masters of reality-bending magic was their discovery of the Nether Scrolls, ancient artifacts containing magical knowledge so profound and dangerous that it elevated them to near-divine capabilities. With this knowledge, they created wonders that have never been equaled, most famously the floating cities that hovered impossibly in the sky above their earthbound settlements. The mechanism by which Netherese cities floated involved artifacts called mythalers, magical devices of immense power that could keep entire cities aloft indefinitely. Each floating enclave required its own mythaler, and these artifacts represented some of the most sophisticated magical engineering ever achieved. The mythalers drew power from the weave itself, channeling unimaginable amounts of magical energy to overcome gravity and maintain their city's suspension hundreds or even thousands of feet above the ground. This achievement alone would have secured Netheral's place in history, but they accomplished far more during their long existence. The Netherese obtained obelisk construction knowledge through a dark inheritance. When Vecna stole the knowledge of how to create obelisks after erasing their creators from existence, that knowledge eventually passed to Netherese hands through means not entirely clear in the historical record. What is documented is the Netherese intention. They built obelisks hoping these structures might preserve or restore their civilization should catastrophe strike. This suggests the Netherese understood at least some of the obelisk's original purpose, that the weavers designed them to counteract calamitous spells and cataclysmic events. The tragic irony of Netherese obelisk construction becomes apparent when examining the Empire's fall. In the year of sundered webs, 1,850 years before Dale Reckoning, the Archmage Karsus attempted to usurp the power of Mistral, goddess of magic. His spell, later known as Karsus's Folly, briefly succeeded, but the mortal mind could not contain or control divine magical power. The spell's backlash killed Karsus instantly, caused the goddess Mistral to sacrifice herself to save the weave, and resulted in magic failing across Faerun for several minutes. During those critical minutes, the mythalers keeping Netheral's flying cities aloft ceased functioning, and the cities fell from the sky. If the Netherese built obelisks designed to preserve or restore their civilization, those structures clearly failed in their purpose, or were never activated, or were insufficient to counter the magnitude of Karsus's catastrophe. The Empire fell. The cities crashed to earth. The fertile lands that supported Netheral's population transformed over subsequent centuries into the lifeless Anauroch Desert. Whatever the obelisks might have accomplished, they did not prevent this outcome. This raises uncomfortable questions about whether the Netherese truly understood the technology they inherited, or whether obelisks require specific conditions or activation sequences that were never fulfilled. You examine the ruins of what was once a Netherese settlement, now buried beneath centuries of sand accumulation. The buildings have crumbled to dust, but occasionally you find artifacts that survived, fragments of pottery, corroded metal, and sometimes, rarely, intact magical items protected by enchantments that outlasted the civilization that created them. If Netherese obelisks exist in these ruins, they would likely be among the few structures capable of surviving millennia of exposure. Their inherent magical nature and the skill of their construction might render them impervious to simple weathering and erosion, standing intact even as everything around them disintegrated. The return of the Shadivar in the year of wild magic, 1372 Dale Reckoning, brought renewed attention to Netherese magical technology. The Shadivar are survivors of Netheril who fled to the plane of shadow before the fall and returned to Faerun after over 3 millennia of exile. They brought with them their floating city of Shade Enclave, demonstrating that they preserved at least some Netherese magical knowledge through their long absence. Whether they also preserved knowledge of obelisk construction, or have been searching for intact Netherese obelisks, since their return remains a matter for speculation. Though their interest in recovering any Netherese magical technology seems highly probable given their documented activities, the city of Ithrin, one of Netheril's flying enclaves, provides concrete evidence of Netherese interaction with obelisk-like artifacts. Ithrin fell from the sky and became trapped in ice in what is now Icewind Dale. Within the frozen city lies a rune-carved stone spindle, an artifact that predates even Netheril, originating from an empire called Astoria. When Netherese researchers conducted experiments on this spindle, they inadvertently caused their cities, Mythalar, to fail, resulting in the catastrophic crash that buried Ithrin in ice. This demonstrates both Netherese interest in ancient magical artifacts and the dangers inherent in experimenting with technologies whose full properties remain unknown. The spindle in Ithrin possesses extraordinary properties that suggest a relationship to obelisk magic, even if it is not technically an obelisk itself. When targeted by a spell of 5th level or higher, the spindle triggers an explosion of magical energy that suppresses all magic items and effects within 3 miles for 24 hours. This anti-magic effect bears similarity to one documented purpose of obelisks, counteracting magical catastrophes. The spindle achieves this through suppression rather than counteraction. But the underlying principle of neutralizing dangerous magic appears consistent with what the weavers intended their obelisks to accomplish. Based on the evidence from Ithrin, we might infer that the Netherese studied various ancient artifacts, hoping to understand or replicate their properties. The spindle came from Astoria, suggesting the Netherese collected powerful artifacts from multiple previous civilizations. If they possessed obelisk construction knowledge from Vecna's theft, they may also have sought out original weaver obelisks to study and compare against their own creations. This archaeological and research approach would be consistent with Netherese behavior documented in other contexts. They were voracious consumers of magical knowledge from any source they could access. The specific methods Netherese wizards used to construct their obelisks remain unknown, as detailed records have not survived or have not been discovered. We know they possessed the knowledge, we know they built obelisks, and we know those obelisks were intended to preserve or restore their civilization. Beyond these basic facts, reconstruction requires inference and speculation. Given Netherese sophistication with other forms of magical engineering, particularly the Mythalers, we might reasonably assume their obelisks were technically sophisticated and carefully designed. Whether they matched the quality of the originals created by the weavers cannot be determined from available evidence. The scattered nature of potential Netherese obelisk sites across what was once their territory suggests they may have built multiple structures rather than relying on a single installation. The Netherese Empire, at its height, controlled vast territories across what is now northern Faerun. A civilization that could build dozens of floating cities certainly had the resources to construct multiple obelisks if they believed doing so would serve their preservation goals. The question becomes not whether they could build multiple obelisks, but whether any survive intact after 3,000 years of abandonment and environmental exposure. Modern attempts to locate Netherese obelisks face significant challenges. The Anauroch Desert covers much of what was once fertile Netherese land, burying ruins beneath sand that shifts constantly with desert winds. Excavation requires substantial resources and protection against the desert's harsh environment and the dangerous creatures that inhabit it. Even when ruins are located, determining whether they contain obelisks requires extensive exploration and archaeological work. Many expeditions return empty-handed, having found only mundane ruins devoid of significant magical artifacts. You participate in one such expedition, joining a team from Candlekeep searching for Netherese ruins that might contain an obelisk. Weeks of travel and excavation yield fragments of pottery, corroded tools, and the foundations of buildings long since collapsed. The team's divination magic indicates something powerful buried deeper beneath the sand. But digging deeper proves increasingly difficult as the walls of the excavation threaten to collapse. After a month of effort, you retreat, the potential discovery remaining tantalizingly out of reach beneath tons of sand. This experience is typical rather than exceptional. Netherese secrets do not yield themselves easily to modern seekers. The legacy of Netherese obelisks extends beyond their immediate physical presence or absence. They represent a civilization's desperate attempt to protect itself against catastrophe, an attempt that ultimately failed. This failure serves as a sobering reminder that even the most sophisticated magical preparations may prove insufficient when confronted with events of sufficient magnitude. Karsus's folly was such an event, a catastrophe so complete that it destroyed not only Netheril, but also killed a goddess and temporarily disabled magic itself across the entire world. Perhaps no safeguard, not even Weaver-designed obelisks, could have mitigated damage on that scale. Modern scholars studying Netherese history often focus on the Empire's hubris, the overconfidence that led Karsus to attempt his impossible spell. But examining their obelisk construction reveals a different aspect of Nethere's character. They recognized their vulnerability. They understood that catastrophe might strike despite their power. They attempted to prepare for the worst, building safeguards they hoped would preserve their civilization beyond any disaster. This foresight and precaution sits uncomfortably alongside the recklessness that ultimately destroyed them, suggesting a civilization aware of danger, yet unable to prevent its most ambitious members from creating the very catastrophe they feared. The question of whether any Netherese obelisks remain functional after 3,000 years cannot be definitively answered without finding and examining intact examples. Magical items of sufficient power can persist indefinitely if properly constructed and protected from destructive forces. The Netherese certainly possessed the skill to build enduring magical structures, as demonstrated by artifacts that still function after millennia. Whether obelisks specifically were designed for such longevity, and whether they could maintain function without maintenance or external power sources, remains unknown. The possibility exists that somewhere beneath the sands of Anarok, Netherese obelisks stand intact and operational, waiting for someone to discover and perhaps activate them. The implications of discovering a functional Netherese obelisk are profound. Such a find would provide concrete information about obelisk construction and capabilities, information available nowhere else given the erasure of the Weavers and the loss of Netherese records. It might even be possible to study such an obelisk's internal workings and attempt to replicate the construction process, though this would require magical expertise of the highest order and would certainly be dangerous given what happened to Ithrin when they experimented with a similar artifact. The potential benefits must be weighed against very real risks. The story of Netherese obelisks ultimately remains incomplete, a chapter of history with more gaps than solid information. We know the beginning. Knowledge stolen by Vecna from the Weavers eventually reached Nethere's hands. We know the intention: preservation or restoration of civilization against catastrophe. We know the outcome. Netheril fell despite whatever obelisks they built. What we do not know, and may never know without significant new discoveries, is the middle of the story. How many obelisks did the Netherese build? Where are they located? Do any remain functional? What specific capabilities did they possess? These questions drive ongoing research and exploration. Each expedition into the Anauroch Desert motivated by hope that this time, finally, a major discovery will fill in the gaps and reveal the full truth about Netherese obelisk magic. Section 3. Cursed Obelisks and Malevolent Powers. Not all obelisks were raised with the noble intentions the weavers originally envisioned. The very fact that Vecna stole obelisk construction knowledge after committing the ultimate evil of erasing an entire group from existence suggests that this technology could be turned toward dark purposes. When powerful magical artifacts fall into malevolent hands, their original protective purposes can be perverted, corrupted, or deliberately inverted to cause the very harm they were designed to prevent. Your travels take you to regions where ancient magical structures have been corrupted by time, neglect, or deliberate malice. The question of what happens to an obelisk when it is damaged, when its original enchantments degrade, or when dark rituals are performed upon it, becomes critically important. These structures were designed to interact with reality at fundamental levels, to counteract calamitous spells and cataclysmic events. If such a structure malfunctions or becomes corrupted, the potential for harm could equal or exceed its original protective capacity. The most concrete example of obelisk-related danger comes from the shattered obelisk beneath Phandalin. According to that adventure's narrative, fragments of an ancient obelisk have become objects of dark interest, with mind flayers and cultists of the elder evil Ilvash seeking to gather the pieces. This suggests that even broken obelisks retain sufficient power to be valuable and dangerous. The mind flayer's interest implies the fragments could serve purposes aligned with aberrant goals, potentially very different from and opposed to the obelisk's original protective functions. What an assembled obelisk might accomplish in the hands of mind flayers, working for an elder evil, represents a threat serious enough to drive an entire published adventure. The concept of corruption affecting magical structures has precedent throughout D&D lore. Myth Draenor, once the greatest elven city, fell to demonic invasion, and structures that once protected the city became twisted to serve the invaders. If protective magical infrastructure can be corrupted in one context, the possibility exists that obelisks might suffer similar fates. An obelisk designed to counteract harmful magic might, if corrupted, instead amplify such magic. A structure meant to stabilize reality might destabilize it. The inversion of purpose represents perhaps the most insidious form of corruption, turning tools of protection into weapons of destruction. Based on what we know about how magic can be corrupted in D&D, several theoretical corruption vectors might affect obelisks. Prolonged exposure to negative energy, whether from nearby sources of evil or from catastrophic events that killed thousands in close proximity, could taint an obelisk's magical structure. Demonic or infernal entities known for corrupting other magical works might target obelisks specifically because of their power and significance. Deliberate rituals performed by evil spellcasters seeking to pervert obelisks toward dark purposes could override or corrupt their original enchantments. While specific examples of these corruption methods affecting obelisks are not documented in available sources, the theoretical framework exists based on how other magical structures and items behave when exposed to similar influences. The Shadowfell, that dark reflection of the material plane where color and hope drain away, presents particular risks for any magical structure. The Shadowvar, Netherese survivors who spent over 3,000 years in the plane of shadow before returning, would have intimate knowledge of how shadow magic affects and potentially corrupts other enchantments. If Netherese obelisks exist or existed in regions that have since become connected to the Shadowfell, those structures might have been transformed by millennia of shadow exposure. The resulting artifacts could retain obelisk properties while also manifesting shadow-aligned characteristics that diverge significantly from their original design specifications. You examine a structure that might be a corrupted obelisk, though certainty proves elusive. The stone appears wrong somehow, darker than natural rock, yet not quite black, absorbing light in ways that create unsettling visual effects. The runes, if they are runes, bear little resemblance to any documented magical script. Without access to detailed records of what this structure looked like originally, determining whether you are witnessing corruption or simply encountering an obelisk built according to different specifications becomes impossible. This uncertainty characterizes much obelisk research. The lack of baseline information makes identifying deviations extraordinarily difficult. The question of whether obelisks can be deliberately weaponized, repurposed from their protective functions to serve as tools of destruction, carries profound implications. If the weavers built obelisks capable of counteracting calamitous spells, those same structures might be reconfigured to trigger or amplify such spells instead. The knowledge Vecna stole included not just construction methods, but presumably also operational principles, an understanding of how obelisks interact with the weave and with reality itself. Someone possessing that knowledge could potentially modify existing obelisks or construct new ones serving entirely different purposes. Whether Vecna ever created weaponized obelisks, or whether the Netherese attempted such projects, remains unknown, but certainly possible given both entities' documented behavior in other contexts. The removal or destruction of corrupted obelisks presents enormous challenges. If obelisks are built to withstand calamitous events, simple physical demolition would likely prove ineffective. Magical destruction faces the complication that obelisks themselves are sophisticated magical devices, potentially capable of deflecting or absorbing offensive spells. The spindle in Ithrin demonstrates one danger. Experimenting with or attempting to destroy such artifacts can trigger catastrophic anti-magic effects spanning miles. Applying force to a corrupted obelisk without understanding its current capabilities could produce results ranging from complete failure to success with unacceptable collateral damage. Specialized knowledge would be required to safely neutralize a corrupted obelisk, knowledge that may not exist in the current age. The weavers who could have explained proper decommissioning procedures were erased from existence by Vecna. The Netherese who might have documented such procedures are gone, their civilization destroyed 3,000 years ago. Modern wizards attempting to deal with corrupted obelisks must therefore rely on general magical principles, careful observation, and experimentation, approaches that carry significant risk when applied to artifacts of this power level and importance. Organizations dedicated to identifying and neutralizing magical threats would naturally take interest in corrupted obelisks if such structures were confirmed to exist. Groups like the Harpers, who work to preserve balance and counter evil across Faerun, would recognize corrupted obelisks as exactly the sort of threat requiring their attention. Paladin orders devoted to gods of protection and justice would similarly view corrupted obelisks as priority targets. However, the actual methods these organizations might employ remain largely theoretical, without documented cases of successful corrupted obelisk neutralization to serve as precedent. The ethical questions surrounding obelisks, corrupted or otherwise, extend beyond simple destruction versus preservation debates. Even a corrupted obelisk contains historical information and magical knowledge that cannot be recovered if the structure is destroyed. Scholars might argue for attempting to study and perhaps purify corrupted obelisks rather than destroying them outright. Pragmatists would counter that the risk of a corrupted obelisk causing harm outweighs any academic benefit from its preservation. The debate mirrors similar discussions about other dangerous magical artifacts throughout D and D settings, with no clear consensus emerging, because both positions have merit depending on specific circumstances. The possibility that some obelisks were built with malevolent intent from the beginning, rather than being corrupted after construction, cannot be dismissed. If Vecna possessed obelisk construction knowledge after erasing the weavers, he had centuries or millennia to experiment with the technology before that knowledge passed to Nethery's hands. Vecna's documented character and goals suggest he would have little interest in building protective structures as the weavers intended. More likely, he would have explored how obelisk magic could serve his own purposes, which frequently involved destruction, domination, and the accumulation of power through any means necessary. Whether any Vecna-built obelisks exist, where they might be located, and what purposes they serve remains entirely speculative, but aligns with what is known about his methods and ambitions. The transformation of protective infrastructure into threats represents one of the darker aspects of magical history. The same sophistication and power that makes obelisks effective as safeguards makes them equally effective as weapons if their purposes are inverted. This duality characterizes much powerful magic in D and D settings. The tools that can accomplish the greatest good can also inflict the greatest harm depending on who wields them and toward what ends. Obelisks exemplify this principle on a grand scale. Structures designed to protect entire civilizations, potentially becoming civilization-destroying threats if corrupted or misused. Your encounters with potentially corrupted obelisks teach you caution and respect for power you do not fully understand. Each structure could be a dormant safeguard from ancient times, a corrupted threat waiting to cause harm, or something else entirely. Without the knowledge base to distinguish between these possibilities reliably, approaching any obelisk requires treating it as potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. This conservative approach may mean missing opportunities to activate beneficial obelisk functions, but it also prevents triggering catastrophes through ignorant interference with systems beyond current comprehension. The story of cursed and corrupted obelisks ultimately remains largely speculative, built on theoretical foundations rather than extensive documented cases. We know obelisks exist. We know they possess great power. And we know that in D and D settings, powerful magical artifacts frequently become corrupted or turned toward evil purposes. From these known facts, we can reasonably infer that corrupted obelisks might exist even if we lack specific confirmed examples. This gap between theoretical possibility and documented reality characterizes much obelisk research. We know enough to ask important questions, but not enough to answer them definitively. Section 4. Elemental, planar, and extraplanar obelisks. The material plane where most adventures occur is but one layer of a vast multiverse. D and D cosmology includes numerous other planes of existence. The elemental planes of fire, water, earth, and air. The outer planes where gods and their servants dwell. The astral and ethereal planes connecting other realities and stranger dimensions beyond. The question naturally arises whether obelisks exist beyond the material plane. And if so, whether they serve similar or different purposes in those alien environments. The established lore about obelisks provides limited information about their planar distribution. We know the weavers created obelisks to counteract calamitous spells and cataclysmic events. We know Vecna stole this knowledge, and eventually it reached Netheri's hands. These events apparently occurred primarily on the material plane, specifically within the regions that would become Faerun. Whether the Weavers, Vecna, or the Netherese ever built obelisks on other planes remains undocumented in available sources. The absence of documentation does not prove absence, but it does mean any discussion of planar obelisks moves substantially into speculative territory. Theoretical considerations suggest that if obelisks serve to counteract magical catastrophes and stabilize reality, other planes might benefit from such structures as much as or more than the material plane. The elemental planes, realms of pure elemental force, where earth, air, fire, and water exist in their most concentrated and chaotic forms, would presumably experience magical instabilities requiring management. If obelisk technology were available to planar entities, or if material plane builders could establish structures on other planes, the elemental planes represent logical deployment locations. However, this remains entirely theoretical, without supporting evidence from canonical sources. The genies, powerful entities native to the elemental planes, are known to be sophisticated builders who construct cities, fortresses, and other grand structures within their home planes. The Tao build within solid earth. The Jinn create cloud palaces in endless skies. The Marids establish undersea domains, and the Efreet raise fortresses of brass and flame. Given their architectural ambitions and magical capabilities, genies could theoretically construct obelisk-like structures if they possessed the knowledge and motivation. Whether they do so, whether they ever encountered obelisk technology through contact with material plane civilizations, or whether they developed similar technologies independently, cannot be confirmed from available information. You consider what an obelisk might look like if adapted to an elemental plane's unique environment. On the plane of fire, extreme heat would require construction from materials capable of withstanding or incorporating fire itself. On the plane of water, structures must endure constant submersion and pressure. On the plane of earth, solid rock extends in all directions, offering abundant building material, but requiring excavation or displacement. On the plane of air, lack of stable ground necessitates either floating structures or anchoring to the rare solid objects found in that realm. Each environment presents unique challenges that would influence obelisk design if such structures exist in those locations. The Shadowfell deserves particular attention because of its connection to the Shadowvar, Netherese survivors who spent over 3 millennia in the plane of shadow before returning to Faerun. If the Shadowvar possessed knowledge of Netherese obelisk construction, which is possible though not confirmed, they might have built obelisks within the plane of shadow during their long exile. Such structures would be adapted to shadow magic and shadow environments, potentially functioning quite differently from their material plane counterparts. When the Shadowvar returned with their floating city of Shade Enclave, any obelisks they built might have accompanied them or remained in the Shadowfell, continuing to function in that dark realm. The astral plane, that silver void where thought becomes reality and distance loses meaning, hosts various entities and structures, including the petrified bodies of dead gods. The Githyanki, militant psychic warriors who make the astral plane their home, have built fortresses and settlements throughout their territory. Whether Githyanki architecture includes obelisk-like structures, and whether any such structures serve similar functions to material plane obelisks, remains unknown. The Githyanki's emphasis on military applications and psychic power might lead them to develop different magical infrastructure than material plane civilizations. Or they might have encountered and adapted obelisk technology through their extensive planar travels and raids. The outer planes where gods dwell and alignment takes physical form present interesting theoretical cases for obelisk deployment. If obelisks counteract magical catastrophes, divine realms might have less need for such protections given the gods' direct control over their domains. Alternatively, the immense magical energies flowing through divine realms might create instabilities requiring management through obelisk-like structures. Mount Celestia, the Nine Hells, the Abyss, and other outer planes each have unique characteristics that might necessitate or preclude obelisk construction. Without documented examples, these possibilities remain purely speculative. Portal magic and planar travel have been achieved through various means throughout D&D history. Permanent portals connecting different planes require substantial magical infrastructure to maintain stability. Whether obelisks specifically serve this function, or whether entirely different magical technologies handle planar connections, varies depending on who built the portal and what resources they had available. The Netherese were certainly capable of creating portals, and if they possessed obelisk knowledge, they might have used it for portal stabilization. However, many portals predate Netheril or were built by entities with no connection to obelisk technology, demonstrating that portals and obelisks are not inherently linked, even if they might sometimes be combined. The far realm, that alien dimension beyond the normal multiverse, where the laws of reality operate according to incomprehensible principles, represents the ultimate unknown. The far realm's fundamental alienness means that any structures existing there, if the concept of structures even applies in that context, would defy understanding by material plane minds. Whether anything resembling obelisks exists in the far realm, or whether far realm entities have encountered material plane obelisks and attempted to replicate or corrupt them, enters the realm of cosmic horror rather than documented fact. Cultists who worship far realm entities sometimes attempt to bridge the gap between the far realm and material reality, seeking to bring their alien patron's influence into the normal multiverse. Such attempts frequently produce reality warping effects, as far realm properties seep into regions unable to accommodate them naturally. Whether these cultists ever incorporate obelisk-like structures into their rituals, either attempting to use actual obelisks or constructing imitations, would depend on whether they have access to obelisk knowledge and whether they believe such structures could facilitate their goals. Given that obelisks were designed to counteract catastrophes, using them to enable far realm intrusions seems counterintuitive. But corruption and perversion of purpose remain possible. The Feywild, that realm of heightened emotions and natural beauty, where archfey rule their domains, mirrors the material plane in many ways while differing in others. Structures on the material plane often have Feywild counterparts, though the Feywild versions typically appear transformed by that realm's whimsical and emotionally charged nature. If obelisks exist on the material plane in locations that have Feywild reflections, those obelisks might appear differently in the Feywild, perhaps as living trees with rune-carved bark, or as crystal formations growing naturally from the earth. Whether such Feywild obelisks retain the functions of their material plane counterparts or serve different purposes aligned with Feywild nature remains entirely speculative. The distribution of obelisks across the multiverse, if they exist beyond the material plane at all, likely reflects the same factors that determined their material plane placement. Locations of particular importance, sites where reality requires stabilization, regions prone to magical catastrophes. These would be logical deployment locations, regardless of which plane they occupy. The Weavers, if they had the capability to build across planes, would presumably apply similar site selection criteria to all their construction projects. However, we have no confirmation that the Weavers ever operated beyond the material plane, making this entire line of reasoning purely theoretical. Your research into planar obelisks ultimately reveals more gaps than solid information. The fundamental documentation about obelisk origins, purposes, and capabilities focuses entirely on material plane contexts. Extrapolating from that limited information to draw conclusions about planar obelisks requires making assumptions that may or may not reflect reality. The safest position acknowledges that planar obelisks might exist, while recognizing that current evidence neither confirms nor denies their existence conclusively. Further research, particularly access to Shadowvar knowledge, or discovery of intact Weaver or Netherese records, might clarify whether obelisks truly span the multiverse or remain primarily material plane phenomena. The theoretical frameworks for understanding how obelisks might function on other planes can be constructed based on known planar properties and obelisk capabilities. An obelisk on the plane of fire would need to channel or resist intense heat. An astral obelisk would interact with that plane's psychic and thought-responsive properties. A Shadowfell obelisk would incorporate shadow magic and possibly amplify or resist that realm's despair-inducing nature. These theoretical adaptations make logical sense, but logic alone cannot confirm whether such adapted obelisks actually exist without empirical evidence from planar exploration and documentation. The question of who would build planar obelisks, assuming they exist, narrows the possibilities. Material plane civilizations with sufficient power and knowledge might establish obelisks on other planes if they had strategic reasons to do so. Planar natives with access to obelisk construction knowledge might build structures adapted to their home plane's unique properties. Gods or other powerful entities operating across multiple planes might deploy obelisks as part of cosmic scale projects. Each possibility has some theoretical support, but none can be confirmed without substantially more information than is currently available. Section 5. Contemporary mysteries and active obelisk networks. The ancient past holds many secrets, but the present moment offers its own mysteries. Obelisks continue to appear in contemporary adventures, driving plots and challenging parties who encounter them. The shattered obelisk beneath Phandalin, the spindle within frozen Ithrin, and references to obelisks in other contexts demonstrate that these structures remain relevant to current events rather than being mere historical curiosities. Understanding what obelisks do, where they are located, and how they might be used or misused matters not just for academic reasons, but for practical ones, as adventuring parties regularly discover. Your adventures bring you into contact with obelisk-related phenomena more often than you might realize. The Phandelver region, seemingly a simple rural area of farms and mines, conceals fragments of an ancient obelisk that have become objects of dark interest. Mind flayers working through intermediaries and cultists devoted to the elder evil Ilvash seek to gather these fragments, suggesting the assembled obelisk would serve purposes aligned with aberrant goals. This transforms a region known for mines and goblins into a site of cosmic significance, demonstrating how obelisk presence elevates the stakes of any situation they affect. The specific capabilities of the Phandelver obelisk, once assembled, remain unclear from available documentation. The adventure involves preventing its assembly or dealing with consequences if the villains succeed in gathering all fragments. This implies the assembled obelisk would enable something significant and presumably harmful given the entities seeking it. Whether this particular obelisk was originally built by the Weavers, by Vecna, by the Netherese, or by some other party, and whether its current fragmentary state resulted from deliberate destruction or accident, the adventure's text may clarify for those playing through it. For those studying obelisks generally, the Phandelver case provides concrete contemporary evidence that obelisks remain both potent and dangerous in the current era. The Ithrin spindle presents a different case study. This artifact, which predates Nethril and originates from the Empire of Astoria, demonstrates that obelisk-like structures were being built by multiple civilizations across extended time periods. the spindle's specific properties, triggering anti-magic explosions when targeted by spells of 5th level or higher, make it extraordinarily dangerous to interact with carelessly. The Netherese researchers who experimented on the spindle learned this the hard way when their investigations caused their cities Mythalar to fail and Ithrin to crash into what is now Icewind Dale. This catastrophe, occurring thousands of years ago, still affects the current era through the frozen city's continued presence and the dangers it contains. Adventurers exploring Ithrin face the spindle as both hazard and potential tool. Its anti-magic properties, while dangerous, might be deliberately triggered under controlled circumstances to suppress hostile magic or disable enemy magical items. However, the 3-mile radius of effect and 24-hour duration mean triggering the spindle creates an anti-magic zone affecting friend and foe alike. This transforms tactical decisions about engaging the spindle into high-stakes choices with far-reaching consequences. The spindle's presence in a published adventure ensures that at least some parties have wrestled with these decisions, learning firsthand the complexities of interacting with ancient, powerful artifacts whose full properties remain imperfectly understood. The question of how many obelisks currently exist across Faerun cannot be answered with precision. The Weavers created some unknown number before Vecna erased them. Vecna presumably built some using his stolen knowledge. The Netherese constructed obelisks hoping to preserve their civilization. Whether other civilizations also built obelisks, either independently or using knowledge inherited through the chain from Weavers to Vecna to Netherese to unknown subsequent parties, remains unclear. The sum of all these obelisks, minus however many have been destroyed over millennia, yields a total that could range from handful to hundreds, depending on assumptions about construction rates and survival rates. The distribution of known or suspected obelisk sites across Faerun follows no obvious pattern based on available information. Phandelver in the Sword Coast region has obelisk fragments. Ithrin in Icewind Dale contains the spindle. References to obelisks appear in other adventures set in various locations. Whether this scattered distribution reflects actual obelisk placement patterns, or simply reflects which locations have been featured in published adventures, remains unclear. Undoubtedly, many obelisk sites remain undiscovered, buried beneath ruins, hidden in remote wildernesses, or located in regions that haven't yet been extensively explored or documented. Modern wizards and scholars who study obelisks face significant challenges. Primary sources are nearly non-existent due to the Weaver's erasure, and Netherese records fragmentary survival. Physical access to intact obelisks is limited, with many located in dangerous ruins or remote locations. Experimentation on obelisks carries catastrophic risks, as Ithrin's fate demonstrates. These factors combine to slow research progress substantially. ensuring that obelisk knowledge advances incrementally through hard-won discoveries, rather than through comprehensive, systematic study. Organizations dedicated to magical research or the protection of civilization would naturally take interest in obelisks if they became aware of these structures' significance. Candlekeep, that vast library fortress dedicated to preserving knowledge, almost certainly contains whatever fragmentary texts about obelisks have survived. The Harpers, working to preserve balance and counter threats across Faerun, would recognize obelisks as potentially important either as assets to protect or threats to neutralize. Red Wizards of Thay, ever seeking to expand their magical knowledge and power, would covet obelisk information if they learned of it. Each organization would approach obelisks from its own perspective and priorities, creating complex dynamics when multiple groups pursue the same obelisk-related goals. You attend a scholarly gathering where obelisk research is discussed, and the debate grows heated as different factions defend their theories. Some scholars argue that obelisks represent a lost golden age of magic that current civilization should strive to recreate. Others insist that obelisk technology is too dangerous, that the risks of experimentation outweigh potential benefits. Still, others take middle positions, advocating for careful study with appropriate precautions. The lack of definitive information means none can definitively prove their position, ensuring the debate continues unresolved. The question of whether new obelisks can or should be built in the current age generates particular controversy. The knowledge has been lost, the weavers erased, and Netheri's records incomplete. Attempting to recreate obelisk construction without complete information risks producing flawed results that might fail catastrophically. Yet, if obelisks truly were designed to counteract magical catastrophes, having functional obelisks available might prevent future disasters. The tension between these positions, between caution and ambition, between preservation and innovation, mirrors broader debates about magical research and the responsibilities that come with power. The potential for obelisks to fall into hostile hands represents a significant concern. The Phandelver situation, where mind flayers and aberrant cultists seek obelisk fragments, demonstrates this threat concretely. If entities opposed to civilization's well-being obtain obelisks and successfully activate or weaponize them, the results could be devastating. This creates pressure to locate obelisks proactively, either to secure them against hostile acquisition or to destroy them if securing them proves impossible. However, destroying obelisks means losing whatever knowledge they contain and eliminating whatever protective functions they might serve. Costs that must be weighed against security concerns. Recent discoveries continue to reshape understanding of obelisks, though recent must be understood relatively given the slow pace of obelisk research. Each new obelisk site discovered each fragment of documentation recovered from ancient ruins, each published adventure featuring obelisks, adds incrementally to the collective knowledge base. These additions sometimes confirm existing theories, sometimes contradict them, and frequently raise new questions. The overall trajectory moves toward better understanding, but the pace frustrates researchers who wish for faster progress. The network hypothesis, that obelisks might be connected to each other in some functional way, represents one area of active theoretical debate. If the weavers or Netherese built multiple obelisks, did they design them to operate independently or as coordinated systems? A network of interconnected obelisks could accomplish far more than isolated structures, potentially providing coverage across entire continents. However, confirming network connections requires finding multiple obelisks, determining whether they share design characteristics, suggesting common builders, and testing whether activating one affects others. This research program requires resources and access that few organizations possess. Your own encounters with obelisks have taught you both respect and caution. Each structure you discover could be dormant safeguard, active threat, or something between those extremes. Without expertise to make reliable assessments, approaching obelisks requires treating them as potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. This conservative approach may mean missing opportunities to benefit from obelisk capabilities, but it also prevents triggering catastrophes through ignorant interference. The balance between curiosity and caution defines much obelisk research, with different parties finding that balance at different points, depending on their risk tolerance and priorities. The broader implications of obelisk existence extend beyond immediate practical concerns. These structures, built by the weavers to counteract magical catastrophes, represent foresight and responsibility on a civilizational scale. The weavers looked ahead to potential disasters and built infrastructure to mitigate them. Modern civilization, lacking both the knowledge to create obelisks and complete understanding of how existing obelisks function, operates without that level of magical infrastructure protection. This vulnerability might never matter if no catastrophes on the scale the weavers feared ever occur. But if such catastrophes do strike, the absence of functional obelisk networks could mean the difference between surviving with damage and complete destruction. The story of obelisks ultimately remains incomplete, a puzzle with more missing pieces than recovered ones. We know the weavers created them. We know Vecna destroyed the weavers and stole their knowledge. We know that knowledge reached Nethery's hands, and we know obelisks continue to appear in contemporary contexts. Beyond these basic facts, much remains speculation, inference, and extrapolation. Future discoveries may fill in gaps and resolve debates, or they may simply add new questions to the existing collection. Either way, obelisks will continue to fascinate and challenge those who encounter them. standing as monuments to civilizations lost and knowledge forgotten, while potentially serving functions in the present that we have yet to fully comprehend. If you found this exploration of obelisk lore fascinating, if the mysteries and revelations shared tonight have sparked your imagination, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support makes these extensive lore dives possible and ensures I can continue researching and sharing the hidden secrets of Dungeons and Dragons. Like this video if you enjoyed it, share it with fellow adventurers who appreciate thorough explorations of game lore, and let me know in the comments what topics you would like me to investigate next. The multiverse holds endless mysteries, and together we will continue uncovering them.